as Sean said, I'm from the Clothworkers Foundation. I'm the grants manager. Um, and the purpose of this presentation is hopefully just to give you first a bit of basic background about the Clothworkers Foundation. I know some of you may be familiar with us, but some of you will be less so. And then go into the kind of things that we fund, the kind of things that we don't fund, and if you are interested in applying, then how you'd go about doing this. I'm going to look at our application process, some of the specifics about our application process, with some examples and some tips on how to complete probably the most important sections. And whereas this will give you, or hopefully give you, a really good idea of what we do at the Clothworkers Foundation and how to apply, I think a lot of the advice will also be applicable to other funders as well. So please do bear that in mind. As Sean said at the start, I've already shared my slides with him. The session's being recorded. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So don't worry too much about making notes or anything as I go through it. This presentation will be about 20 minutes, so then we can have the rest of the time for questions if you're not sure about anything. So before we get into it, broadly speaking, our mission at the Clothworkers Foundation is that we support charities and social businesses that work with marginalised and disadvantaged communities and people, and those working towards a more equitable society. And what does this mean in practice? So we're a UK-wide funder of charities supporting disadvantaged individuals and communities. We only award capital grants, and historically that's meant tangible things like buildings, equipment and vehicles. And then we've fairly recently, we expanded that criteria as well to include digital infrastructure. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a bit. The kind of organisations that we support in turn support people that fall within 10 different programme areas. And those programme areas are basically the way that we define disadvantage. And I'll go through those in a little bit. We don't place a limit on the minimum or maximum grant that can be awarded. And just to give you an idea of the scale of our giving, in 2024, we spent approximately £8.6 million through our open grants programmes. So the open grants programme, what are they? It's divided into two pathways, small grants and large grants. Small grants are grants of up to £15,000, and they're available to organisations with a turnover of £2 million or less. And decisions take up to 12 weeks through this programme. That is our target. We have been inundated with applications recently. So sometimes it will be a week or two over that 12 weeks, but 12 weeks is the guidance. Large grants programme, and that awards grants of over £15,000, and they're available to organisations with a turnover of 10 million or less, and decisions through that programme take up to 6 months. One caveat that you should be aware of before I go through the whole presentation is that we are currently working on changes to our open grants programme. So they will, those changes will apply both to small and large grants. However, the basic principles will remain. So it will still be capital projects. It will still be funding the same kind of organisations, community interest companies and registered charities. The central pillars of both programs will remain the same, and any changes that we make, we will publicise well in advance. So just something to bear in mind as I go through the presentation. And if you want to ask me any questions about those changes, then feel free to at the end, and I'll do my best to answer. So I've mentioned that we are a capital-only funder, but what do we mean by capital? And essentially, it can be broken down into 4 different categories: buildings, equipment, vehicles, and digital infrastructure. So let's start with the first one, buildings. This can be a few different things. It can be new constructions, it can be purchasing buildings, and it can be refurbishing buildings as well, which is definitely the one that we see most applications for. Equipment can be a really, really wide range of different things. Some of the most common applications include IT equipment, kitchen equipment, furniture, audio-visual equipment. The list goes on, really. Vehicles definitely tends to be minibuses and delivery vehicles that we see the most of. However, it also includes, a range of different things. We've had applications for boats, quad bikes, yeah, whatever you can think of. But it does tend to be minibuses and delivery vehicles that are the most common. And then digital infrastructure, because this was a bit of a new thing for us, and I think was probably a little bit harder for us to get our head around than things like building equipment and vehicles. And I think that probably applies to organizations that want to apply as well. We developed specific guidance for digital infrastructure, for the digital infrastructure grants, which is definitely worth a look if you are interested. You can see the link on the screen there, and that will take you to our guidance. And I also did a specific webinar on the subject of digital infrastructure grants when we first introduced them. And there's a recording on our website. So it's definitely worth a look at both of those if you are interested in digital infrastructure. And just to reiterate, what that means is a lot of your most common expenses, whether it's core costs like staff salaries, renting premises, marketing, etc., we would not fund. We are a capital only funder. So just remember that. So I mentioned earlier that we define disadvantage using 10 different program areas, and you can see them all on the slide now. I won't go through them all because you can see them and there's some more detail on our website, but it's a really, really wide range of different groups. That we receive loads of applications for things like disabilities or young people facing disadvantage. And then there's some much more niche areas which you receive much fewer applications for, things like prison and rehabilitation, substance misuse and addiction, LGBT plus communities. We receive far fewer. So there's a really broad range of different program areas. And just to reiterate, in order to be eligible to apply, your organization must be able to demonstrate that at least half of your beneficiaries fall within one or more of these program areas. And there's a little bit more information, including some example organizations for each of the program areas on our website. So next, if you are thinking of applying, there's a few things that you need to do before you apply. First is to take our eligibility quiz. That's on our website. It'll take no more than a minute or two to complete, and the link's there on the slide. And if your organization is eligible to apply, then you'll be directed to the correct application form automatically on completion of that quiz. Definitely read our exclusions page. I've got some examples there on the slide. We don't fund schools unless they're a special school. We don't fund projects promoting religion, medical equipment or research, political projects, that kind of thing. A lot of the same exclusions as a lot of funders actually, but just to make sure, definitely have a look at that exclusions page if you're thinking of applying. And then, yeah, once again, we are a capital only funder. I've said that about 3 times already, so I won't say it again. So program area. So this is the start. I've got a section where I've picked out 4 of the, I think, the key bits of our application form and, the process in applying to the Clothworkers Foundation. The first bit is the program area. There's a specific question or a couple of questions in the application form which asks you to identify the program area or areas that you want to apply under, and basically to demonstrate that your organization fits with them. So as I mentioned previously, in order to fit, at least half of your beneficiaries must fall into one or more of these program areas. So what I've got is I've got an example A from an application and then an example B. And the idea is it just, in the space of a few lines, it shows you how you can really pack in all the relevant information into your application. So we've got example A here, which says we're applying under the Community Experience in Racial Inequalities Programme area, and our organisation provides a variety of activities and support for the local community at our centre in Durham. This includes drop-in advice sessions, meal deliveries, and ESOL classes for all ages. Now, you may think that includes some good information, and you would certainly be right to an extent. It identifies clearly the programme area they're applied under. It gives a broad idea of the location, decent outline of activities as well, which is all useful for us. But then in example B, and I would stress that we would expect more than a few lines as an answer to this question, but the idea is just to give you an idea of how you can fit the information in. So here you've got only a couple more sentences really, but it identifies the programme area, talks about it, it's being delivered at the centre in Durham, goes a step further, says approximately 90% of our service users are from the local South Asian community, which links back to the programme area that they've chosen. And how do they know that most of their service users are from this community? It's because they've asked them. Straightforward, simple, but does the job and gives us the information that we need to decide whether there's a fit with the programme area. It goes into detail on the services that are offered, a little bit more detail than example A. And then it talks about how the services are a response to the needs of the local community. It says the local council has identified housing, debt and welfare as a priority and has funded the service in the past. So as I say, probably 2 or 3 more sentences, not that much at all, but there's just loads more relevant information in there that's going to help us make a decision when looking at your application. So things to think about when trying to respond to that question about programme area. I think the first one's a good point, actually. This will be really easy for a lot of organisations. If you're working with people with disabilities or people affected by domestic abuse or, any of the other groups that are specifically mentioned as part of our programme areas, it will be fairly straightforward to. However, if you are a bit more of a general community organisation, I've got some examples there: community centres, youth organisations, sports, arts, etc., etc. It's really important that you go that little bit further with your detail in response to the question, because it might not immediately be obvious. So respond directly to that threshold of 50% of your beneficiaries, including percentages if you can, numbers, all really useful. And then if possible, tell us how you know this. So it can be local stats, surveying beneficiaries, as was included in the previous example, the number of people using your services. You can do it in loads of different ways, but just something to think about. So that's how to go about completing the programme area section. Another section, which is obviously a really important one and is really important for any funding application, is the project description. So same principle as going through the programme area. I've got example A, example B, and then some tips at the end. So as you can see, example A, it says they're applying for funding to refurbish the kitchen at their community centre. As part of this, they want to modernise the space and replace faulty equipment. The refurbishment will allow them to increase the number of meals that they're able to cook each day for service users. Again, some decent information in there, a good outline of what they want to do, the projected outcomes of the project as well. They'll be able to increase the number of meals that they're able to cook each day. So, some decent yet basic information there. Now, example B, again, same as the programme area examples, just really 2 or 3 more sentences, but loads more in there for us to go off when we're assessing an application. So it says they want to refurbish the kitchen, replace old and faulty equipment. Then they break it down. They say this will include replacing flooring, which needs replacing because it's dangerous. Also replacing windows that aren't secure. And then talks about the equipment they want to install, breaks it down into each item: oven, hobs, microwave, and this will greatly increase their capacity. Then it goes a step further and says, during the pandemic, demand for our meal delivery service doubled, and this will help them meet the increased need. And again, they've consulted with our local community, and meal deliveries for vulnerable people were seen as a top priority. So not only does it go into the specifics of the project in a bit more detail, breaking down the equipment and flooring and windows and that kind of thing, it talks about why they're planning this project to meet an increased need, and how they know this. So just, again, things to think about when putting together your project description. In this case, it links it back to the community need as well. So just a few bits in summary. If you're applying for equipment, tell us, I mean, it may sound obvious, but we don't always see it. Tell us the items of equipment you want to buy, why you've chosen them and what they'll be used for. Same with vehicles, the model of the vehicle and why you want to buy it. And then we see with a lot of vehicle applications, actually, organizations are very vague about how much they want to use the vehicle. And it will be, and how much an organization is planning to use a vehicle will be a real key bit of information that will distinguish strong applications from weaker applications. So tell us how much it's going to be used, and what for. Even if it's something as simple as like Monday this, Tuesday this, Wednesday this, but it just gives us an idea when we're assessing. Buildings, the address is always very useful for us. What the budget is based on. So, if you're purchasing a building, is that something that you've been quoted? Or if you're doing a refurbishment, how many quotes have you got? Is it an estimation? Is it a more detailed quote? Etc., etc. A massive thing as well for all projects, but particularly for buildings, is looking at your description, looking at your budget and making sure the two match. There's not things included in one and not the other, and vice versa. And it all kind of makes sense when you compare the two, is a really important one. And then digital infrastructure. It's a clear idea of the infrastructure you want to have implemented at the end of the project. So it's not a case of saying, we want to upgrade our database and we want to get in a consultant to have a look at our existing database and see what the options could be. That's all very well and may well be a necessary step for you as an organization. But the stage that Clothworkers get involved is the stage after that, when you've got a reasonable idea, doesn't have to be exact, but a reasonable idea of what you want to do. Then that's the time that you apply to Clothworkers and say, this is what we need the funding for, and this, broadly speaking, will be the end result of the project. For CRMs, like the example I just gave for databases and other software, why you've chosen that particular model, and how the functionality of that helps you as an organization. I think one, particularly for digital infrastructure, what's useful for us and just interesting, for us as a funder to expand our knowledge. If you've taken advice when developing the project plan, which a lot of organizations will have done, just tell us, and give us the sort of rationale for why certain decisions have been made. So that's the project description. The next, I'm going to go through some example budgets. So firstly, this is and I should say, all of these templates are available on our website. And we see a lot of applications come in that use these templates. So just bear that in mind. The first one is a template for a building project, specifically a refurbishment. And as you will see, hopefully with all of these examples, it really doesn't have to be overly complicated. As long as it's just clearly broken down, and as sort of easy to read as possible, that's really all that we're looking for. You can see here, it's got 2 rooms in the refurbishment project and then some additional equipment as well. It's just broken down the steps for each room, additional equipment at the bottom, subtotals 1, 2, 3, and then the total capital costs at the bottom. Certainly at the stage when you apply, this will always be absolutely fine. When we do an in-depth assessment, we might ask for some updates or some questions. And then skipping forward, if you were to be awarded a grant, before we paid the money, we'd ask for something a lot more detailed than this, a signed contract, or, agreement of some kind with the people doing the work. But certainly when you come to submit an application, this would be absolutely fine. And hopefully, reasonably straightforward. Okay. So equipment, possibly even more straightforward than the building template, actually. All we need is a list of the equipment that you want to buy. So you can see on this example, it's got laptops, keyboards, some furniture. A lot of the times, organizations will want to buy the equipment online. So just a web link, the quantity, the price, and the total at the bottom. That's really all that we need. So really, really straightforward. We will ask, similarly to the first example, if you are awarded funding, we will ask for an updated version of this just to make sure all the items are still available, same price, etc. Because sometimes, a bit of time will have passed before you've looked at the prices. But certainly for when you apply, if you have a table that looks something like this, that's absolutely perfect. And then finally, for a vehicle, probably the most simple one of the lot, just the outright purchase costs, any VAT costs. A lot of organizations will want to add some kind of branding or signage to the side of the vehicle. So just an estimation of how much that will cost. And then just, where the quote has been sourced from is always useful as well. So really straightforward. And I've not included a specific digital infrastructure one, actually, because I think any of them can probably apply, but probably this building one at the start is the most relevant. So it doesn't have to be any more complicated than any other kind of budget. For example, if you want to redevelop your organization's website, you could use the exact same principle as redeveloping a physical building, break it down into the sections of the website, the steps that are needed, subtotals, total at the bottom. That would be absolutely fine. And where here you've got architect design fees, it could be website design consultants, or it could be database consultants, or whatever the case may be. Really, the principle is exactly the same as a physical building. So they are a few examples of budgets. And then, so we've been through so far program area, which is a really, really important thing to define because you need to in order to be eligible. Project description, budget, and then the final one is outcomes. So we look at outcomes a little bit differently to a lot of funders, and we view it in this way, that a capital project can often be the first bit of a longer journey for your organization, particularly when it comes to larger, more complicated projects. Building projects definitely come to mind, but other ones as well. It can be really difficult, and it's not particularly precise or accurate to try and identify the eventual outcomes of your beneficiaries. So, if you are purchasing a building and refurbishing it, and it will be ready in 2 years' time, it's not very helpful for us to ask for, how many young people are going to come to the first session on a Friday night in 2 years from now. It's just never going to be accurate or precise, as I say. So we sort of take a bit of a step back and look for the outcomes that a capital project will have for your organization. And then we then take the view that if your organization is supporting people that falls within our program areas, we think, you demonstrate good quality of work, etc., that if your organization benefits, the knock-on impacts for beneficiaries will be apparent. So using this logic, we split outcomes into 3 general areas. and capital projects should be able to demonstrate that they will lead to outcomes that fall within at least one of them. The first one being an improved work environment. The second one is really broad, but maintained, improved, and/or increased services. And then the third one is improved financial sustainability. And I've just got some examples here of how you could respond to the question of outcomes in your application. So, got one example for each kind of project. Firstly, an equipment project, it's the purchase of IT equipment for staff. And the outcomes could be that staff will now have the access to the equipment they need to deliver services. This will mean they're happy and there'll be an improved work environment. The service to beneficiaries will be more effective and efficient because of the time saved by the better equipment. Makes sense. The purchase of a minibus will allow staff to offer transport to beneficiaries, which will reduce barriers to participation and widen the reach of the organisation. The construction of a building, in this case a community centre. The new community centre will ensure that more services and community spaces are available to beneficiaries from across programme areas. And the organisation will also own its own building, which will improve its financial sustainability. And then the final example is the development of a website. And this will mean that the charity will have a greater online presence and more young people will be able to access information about the support services that the charity provides. Now, I should stress, as it was the case with a few of the examples we've been through, we would expect a more detailed response to this question. And when I say more detailed, I mean longer, but also with more information that is specific to your organisation and your project. But these are just kind of template answers, which hopefully will give you an idea of how different kind of capital projects lead to the outcomes that we're looking for. Oh yeah, so as I mentioned, all the budget templates and the guidance and outcomes is available on our website. And I'm just going to finish off with some general application tips and then I can open it up for some questions. So if you're thinking about applying, definitely familiarise yourself with the Clothworkers Foundation. Hopefully this session will go a long way to doing that. And as a reminder, we fund capital items for registered organisations working across 10 different programme areas. You have to take our eligibility quiz and definitely make sure to read about exclusions just to make sure. If you're not sure about anything, then you can get in touch and we'll always be happy to have a chat on the phone or answer an email. Make sure that you're effectively communicating those key areas that we've been through. So 4 of them: programme area, project description, budget and outcomes. And then finally, one bit of advice someone said to me years ago, but I think it's a really good one and applies to any funding application really. Once you've drafted your application, get someone who is not involved with your organisation to read it and feedback. And that will help to identify any gaps in information, things that may seem obvious or second nature to you because you're living and breathing the work that you do. But us as assessors that may not have ever heard of your organisation before would not necessarily know. So I always think that's a good bit of advice. Yes, if you'd like to get in touch, that is our email address, is foundation@clothworkers.co.uk. But that is it for my presentation. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, and I can open it up to questions.
Yeah, that's very full information. Do join us with your cameras so we can see you folks. That will be lovely too. Jack, you mentioned there about getting another person to overlook your application, and I do provide that service across North Northamptonshire to help local organisations. That's part of the Aspire NN work that we do, infrastructure support. So do use us if that's helpful.